We will now move to hear from the NGOs from Georgia. First, we'll hear from Sapari, and I will give the floor to Madam Baya Pataraya. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me present the main findings of Shadow Report prepared by Equality Coalition, consisting of 9 NGOs. During the reporting period, much has been improved regarding legislation combating violence against women. Nevertheless, major legislative gap remains in relation to sex crimes. Lack of consent is not a central aspect of the rape. Rather, violence and threat of violence are seen as a crucial aspect for the qualification of rape. In addition, standard of proof remains unreasonably high in practice when it comes to sex crimes. Lack of formal sexual education, poor legislation, and problematic practice leaves sex crimes underreported and unpunished. Rising number of femicides and attempts of femicides is extremely concerning in Georgia. Risk assessment is not performed with due diligence by law enforcement and justice sector. Usage of electronic monitoring of abusers is available but rarely used. Yet another major problem with the police is the procedure of collecting statements from witnesses and victims of gender-based violence. Neither audio-video recordings are made, nor verbatim transcribing is performed during statement collection. It needs to be highlighted that most fundamental reason of femicide is gender inequality in public perception and beliefs, which is not adequately addressed by the government and formal educational system. Access to services for the victims of gender-based violence is limited. We have shortage of crisis centers and shelters. There are no rape crisis centers. Insufficient psychological support remains as a challenge. Economic empowerment programs for victims of domestic violence are underdeveloped. Economic violence against women in families is normalized and no effective remedies available to combat it. Feminization of poverty has not been addressed by the government. Inexistence of minimum wage regulations affects women in employment. It is worth mentioning that public health system in Georgia has a poor gatekeeping role. It fails in prevention, including in sexual and reproductive health services. Women's representation in politics remains low as mandatory gender quotas are weak and could secure only 20% of seats for the women during last parliamentary elections. Women politicians face extreme sexist hate speech. Active women who work as coordinators for the political parties face multiple forms of gender-based violence during elections. Women activists and human rights defenders have been facing hostile attitudes and online harassment from the society at large, fueled by internet trolls and bots. Moreover, the government not only fails to recognize, encourage, and support women human rights defenders and women heads of NGOs, but itself verbally attacks them and contributes to the growing aggression against them.
Gracias. Quiero pasarle ahora la palabra a la...
Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to Madam Elena Ruseskaya, representing WIC. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Dear Madam Chair and distinguished CEDAW Committee member, I would like to present my statement on behalf of 29 women's organizations of Georgia regarding 3 key issues. At first, I would like to talk about the gender equality institutions in Georgia. Despite the reforms implemented in the field, there is still a challenge to the sustainable functioning of the gender equality mechanism in the country. Recent changes caused a downgrade of the status of position of heads of gender equality mechanisms at the executive and legislative branches. In particular, at the legislative level, the chairperson of the parliament or one of his/her deputy is not responsible for chairing the Gender Equality Council anymore. At the executive level, the words gender equality have disappeared from the title of Prime Minister Advisor on Human Rights. Previously, the position was named Prime Minister Advisor on Human Rights and Gender Equality Issue. The changes were made without any discussion with the women's rights defenders. All above mentioned raised the question, why were these changes initiated so spontaneously and without any discussions with the women's rights defenders? temporary special measures. In 2020, changes were made to the Georgian election code, according to which temporary special measures, gender quotas, were introduced. This was a step forward and a big achievement of women's CSOs lobbying the issue for many years. As a result, the number of women has increased at the representative bodies, the Parliament of Georgia and the representative body at the local government level. But in order to achieve real gender equality and make visible changes of women, it is required to make additional changes to the legislation and prolong the existence of gender quotas. Women's participation at the decision-making level remains a challenge, which is particularly evident in the low participation rate of women at the level of formal peace negotiation processes. From 2018 to the present, the participation of women in the peace negotiation processes has decreased, especially in the Geneva International Discussion, from the 40% increase today picture corresponds to 8%. Also, the country has already adopted fourth National Action Plan of the UN Security Council Resolution 3025. It is important to integrate the recent challenges related to the war in Ukraine and the Ukrainian refugees women in Georgia in the National Action Plan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Representing EUNA, I would now like to give the floor to Madam Leah Chergulia. You have the floor for 2 minutes.
Intervention on behalf of women living with the HIV community in Georgia. Criminalization of HIV transmission in Georgia, intersecting with gender stereotypes and gender-based violence, makes it harder for women to access HIV services, especially pre-exposure prophylaxis, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights. Stigma and discrimination disproportionately affect women living with HIV, limit decision-making opportunities in the family, community, and society as a whole, restrict their access to financial resources and assets by creating even more barriers to accessing wider range of services and support. On behalf of women living with HIV, I urge our government to decriminalize HIV transmission, specifically remove the Article 131 of the Criminal Code of Georgia that imposes punishment for putting to the risk of HIV transmission and unintentional transmission of HIV. Change the incorrect wording, infection with AIDS, to infection with HIV in all laws and regulations of Georgia. Review the established procedure for notifying a spouse or sexual partners of HIV status. Repeal the article as one that shifts responsibility for HIV transmission and prevention solely to people living with HIV. Review the statutory procedure for providing rights to service providers to share information about positive status to spouses or sexual partners. Repeal the rule which allows breaching the confidentiality and violates privacy. Provide women with access to pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. Provide access to SRHR, including a full range on contraceptives, as well as access to medical abortion and assisted reproductive technologies. And finally, provide comprehensive care for women living with HIV who experience intimate partner violence. We count on CEDAW mechanism and respective collaboration. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. And representing Equality Movement, I would like to give the floor to Madam Anna Apteudi for 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished committee members, I'm honored to address you today on behalf of Equality Movement, a Eurasian coalition on health, rights, gender, and sexual diversity, and Association Themida concerning violations of the rights of lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer women. LGBTQ women form one of the most vulnerable and marginalized groups in Georgia, subject to pervasive discrimination, stigma, persecution, and hate crimes. The incidence of SOGI-based hate crimes remain alarming. The fear of disclosing their identity, re-victimization, the lack of trust in law enforcement institutions, as well as the lack of legal prospects and low awareness of anti-discrimination legislation and poor access to justice contribute to an unwillingness to report. We urge the committee to recommend to the states to strengthen institutional measures within the law enforcement system to effectively fight, investigate, and prevent hate crimes based on SOGI. The government has adopted the new human rights strategy for 2020-2013 and forwarded it to the Parliament for final approval. The government has failed to involve community leaders in the drafting process properly and ignored our feedback anyway. Despite recommendations and appeals from the queer community and civil society organizations, steps to tackle intolerance and discrimination toward queer people were excluded from the final document. LGBTQ issues were fully removed from the Parliament's gender equality concept, and the final version of the document was adopted without any communication with the civil society organizations. Legal gender recognition remains unsettled in Georgia and limits the opportunity for trans women. In practice, civil registered bodies deny trans women changing their gender marker unless they bring a certificate that proves they have undergone a sex reassignment surgery. These procedures are expensive and life-threatening in some cases. We urge the committee to recommend to the states to create transparent and effective administrative mechanisms for legal gender recognition based on respect for human rights. Finally, but not least, homophobic and transphobic attitudes, stigma, and violence in educational settings result in limited access to safe, equitable, and good quality education for LGBTQ women. Institutionalized homophobia fully excludes LGBTQ women from the social welfare system. We urge the committee to recommend to the states to ensure queer women's access to social welfare. Thank you so much.